Welcome to Breaking News to Trading Moves. We're jumping right in today with a transaction that really gives us a window into how global pharmaceutical strategy is being rewritten by the possibility of new trade policy.
That's really the core of it today. The headline itself is Samsung Biologics acquiring a manufacturing facility in Maryland from GSK. But the real story is why this $280 million is being spent now.
Right.
And, what it tells us about this growing need for companies to build out their operational capacity right here inside the United States.
Exactly. So we're going to go beyond the simple M&A announcement. We really need to look at the forces that are creating this localization trend, mostly the chance of new U.S. import tariffs or just more policy pressure on imported drugs. Manufacturing inside the U.S. is moving from, a nice-to-have option to a real competitive necessity for a lot of these players.
And our analysis today is really to understand the market consequences of this. This move is a preventative one. It's meant to mitigate policy risk, and that action creates both opportunities and some very real pressures across the entire healthcare supply chain.
So we'll identify the specific companies that are positioned to gain and those now facing, let's say, elevated vulnerability. We'll cover everything from the tool suppliers all the way down to the ultimate cost bearers, the payers. Okay, let's start by pinning down the specifics of the deal. So Samsung Biologics is buying a GSK drug facility in Maryland. Price tag is $280 million. Who are the actual players involved here?
So we're looking at Samsung Biologics America. They're acquiring 100% of the shares of a company called Human Genome Sciences Inc. The facility itself is in Rockville, Maryland, and the seller is GlaxoSmithKline, or GSK.
Okay.
So this isn't just an empty building. It's a transfer of a fully operational, licensed biomanufacturing entity.
Let's talk about those numbers for a second. $280 million is a lot of money. But the timeline, the close, is expected around the end of the first quarter of 2026. That seems pretty far out for just buying a facility, doesn't it?
It does. And that long horizon, nearly 2 years, is actually very telling in the biopharma world. It suggests this is much more than a real estate deal.
Okay.
It likely involves a very complex operational transition.
Yeah.
You're talking about transferring existing validated manufacturing processes, resubmitting regulatory approvals to reflect the new owner, and this is critical fulfilling existing supply commitments that GSK has.
So they can't just stop production.
Exactly.
Yep.
They need a careful, staged handover to maintain the continuity of the drug supply. They can't just flip a switch. You have to manage the transition of a living, breathing manufacturing operation, all while making sure patients are safe and regulations are met.
That level of detail is, it's essential when you're dealing with biological products. So what about the asset itself? It's 60,000 liters of drug substance capacity. For those of us who aren't familiar with biomanufacturing scale, what does 60,000 liters really represent?
Well, you should think of it this way. 60,000 liters is considered large-scale commercial capacity. In the industry, they often talk about trains of bioreactors.
Okay.
And depending on the specific molecule being produced, let's say it's a monoclonal antibody for cancer, that capacity could potentially produce hundreds of kilograms of finished drug substance every year.
So this isn't for testing or development?
Not at all. This isn't pilot scale. This is the kind of capacity you need to supply a big portion of a national or even a global market for a blockbuster biologic drug.
Yeah.
It's a material amount of capacity being added to the U.S. manufacturing footprint.
And the plan isn't just to take over what's there. The announcement mentioned technology upgrades and expansion are already part of the strategy. This seems to connect directly to that core idea of policy-driven localization.
Absolutely. The main force driving this investment is the policy hedge. Companies are forecasting that U.S. import tariffs on pharmaceuticals are a real possibility, not just some, theoretical risk.
Right.
If you're manufacturing imported drugs, a 15 or 20% tariff immediately eats into your gross margin and makes your whole supply chain unpredictable. Manufacturing here in the U.S. just bypasses that entire problem.
Okay, but let me challenge that for a moment. If Samsung Biologics acquires this U.S. capacity, they're immediately looking at higher U.S. labor costs, higher utility costs, and, often more demanding regulatory oversight than in some other places. Are they really protecting margins, or are they just swapping one risk for another?
That is the essential calculation being made across the industry right now. And in biopharma, The risk of a supply disruption, of trade friction, is seen as far more damaging than slightly higher operational costs.
So security over cost saving.
Yeah, it's all about predictability. The cost of a few percentage points in operating margin is, frankly, nothing compared to the financial and reputational damage of having a major drug stuck at a customs checkpoint or suddenly priced out of the market because of a new tariff. They're choosing supply chain security over the lowest possible manufacturing cost.
This spending commitment is what the market sometimes calls the biomanufacturing capital expenditure, or CapEx movement. So what kind of specific spending is implied when they say technology upgrades in a facility like this?
Well, when Samsung takes over a facility that's been run by a company like GSK for a while, they are likely looking to transition it from older systems, maybe legacy stainless steel systems, which are rigid, require a ton of cleaning, and have really long changeover times between products,
To a more modern setup.
to a more modern setup, which today often means specialized single-use technologies.
So are we literally talking about massive disposable plastic bags and tubing systems replacing permanent steel tanks?
That's exactly what we're talking about. Single-use systems are more flexible. They reduce the need for some really extensive regulatory validation steps tied to cleaning, and they get rid of the intensive sterilization cycles that stainless steel requires.
So you can switch from making one drug to another much faster.
Much faster. It maximizes throughput and flexibility. But replacing those legacy systems requires a huge initial investment in the specialized hardware that holds the bags, new fluid management systems, advanced manufacturing equipment. All that falls under that CapEx commitment. It's a complete infrastructure upgrade cycle.
And lastly, let's think about the competitive dynamics. This adds more capacity to the contract manufacturing space here in the U.S. Does this just drive down prices for everyone?
It definitely increases the competitive pressure, especially for established processes like large-scale monoclonal antibody production. But for the client, the biotech or pharma company, it's a net positive.
More options.
It gives them more options for policy-resilient sourcing. If you're a client with a sensitive, high-value drug, you might be willing to pay a premium for U.S.-based manufacturing just to guarantee you avoid the headache of trade policy. Samsung is positioning itself as a policy-proof partner.
Okay, so the moment Samsung commits that $280 million to acquiring and expanding a U.S. facility, that money starts to flow into the ecosystem. Let's talk about the companies that are set to benefit directly from this. Our first group, the bioprocessing equipment and consumables suppliers.
Yes, and the mechanism benefit here is immediate and direct. Facility modernization, facility expansion, that translates instantly into increased demand for very specialized tools and the recurring supplies you need to run a modern biomanufacturing plant.
You can't just wish the capacity into existence.
Exactly. You can't increase capacity or switch to advanced single-use processes without buying the cutting-edge hardware and the specific consumables to run it.
So let's get specific. Beyond just a generic mention of instruments, if they're adopting these advanced techniques, what are the main areas of purchasing?
You can think of it in three main pillars. First, the core hardware. Things like specialized filter housings, the chromatography columns that are used to purify the proteins, and the actual skids that hold the single-use bioreactors. That's the heavy equipment.
Okay, what's second?
Second, the consumables. These are the high-performance resins that actually do the purification, which can be extremely expensive. The specialized filter membranes, the complex cell culture media you need to grow the cells. These are recurring costs that generate predictable revenue for suppliers for years.
And the third pillar?
Quality control analytics. Every single batch has to be tested using sophisticated instruments, from specialized liquid chromatography to mass spectrometers, just to ensure the drug meets purity and potency standards.
A continued build-out in the U.S., then, seems to ensure a steadier order flow for this whole ecosystem. So let's look at the key names. Starting with Thermo Fisher Scientific, ticker TMO.
TMO benefits profoundly from this because they are really the quintessential one-stop shop for biomanufacturing. They're integrated across nearly every step of the process.
How so?
When Samsung upgrades its labs, TMO provides the testing instruments and the reagents. When Samsung transitions to single-use systems, TMO is a leading provider of that equipment and the specialized plastic consumables. So their revenue benefits from both the big one-time equipment purchases and the steady recurring consumables orders that follow.
And the second major player here is Danaher, ticker DHR.
DHR holds a very strong position, particularly through its separation and purification technologies. If Samsung is optimizing its facility, DHR subsidiaries, which specialize in chromatography resins and complex instruments for what's called downstream processing, the purification step, they're going to see strong demand.
And that purification step is key.
It's the most expensive and complex part of making a biologic. It requires incredible precision to separate the drug from all the impurities. DHR is a market leader in the high-tech tools needed to optimize that step, which makes them an essential beneficiary of any U.S. biomanufacturing investment.
Moving on from the upstream equipment, let's think about the components required once the drug is actually ready. Our second beneficiary group is the injectable packaging and delivery component providers.
This is a crucial and I think often underestimated link in the chain. Increased biologics production, especially sterile injectables, requires very specialized containment and delivery components. These biologics are delicate proteins. They have to be housed in pristine, specialized packaging to maintain sterility and stability over their shelf life.
So we're talking about more than just generic glass vials. These have to meet incredible quality standards.
Precisely. We're talking about highly engineered glass vials, specialized polymer containers, and, perhaps most critically, high-quality elastomeric components like syringe plungers and vial stoppers. These stoppers often have special coatings to ensure they don't leach impurities into the sensitive drug.
And how does the push to onshore manufacturing affect these packaging suppliers specifically?
Well, if more drug substance production shifts onshore, it creates a pull for the corresponding fill finish and packaging capacity to also be geographically co-located, or at least sourced domestically.
It just simplifies the logistics.
And simplifies logistics, enhances supply security, and it puts these suppliers in a much stronger position to secure longer-term contracts, because pharma companies are prioritizing that domestic supply security.
Which companies are we looking at in this space? Let's start with West Pharmaceutical Services, ticker WSTV.
WST is the market leader for these high-value packaging components tailored for injectable medicines. Their technology is all about ensuring drug integrity and delivery reliability. They don't just sell stoppers. They sell complex, coated components designed for sensitive biologics. Any U.S. capacity expansion, like Samsung's, translates directly into a higher volume of required packaging material that meets the highest FDA standards.
And what about the Stivnato Group, ticker STVN?
STVN is another critical supplier. They specialize not only in containment solutions, like their specialized glass vials, but also in the sophisticated drug delivery systems and integrated services that are used in the final fill finish process itself.
So they provide the whole solution.
Exactly. As drug companies onshore their final manufacturing, they need partners who can provide an integrated solution: the vial, the closure, and the machine that fills and seals it at high speed. STVN benefits from that comprehensive approach.
Finally, let's look at the third category of winners: the large-cap pharma companies with strong existing U.S. footprints. These are the players whose assets become more valuable without them having to make a new acquisition.
Their gain is purely strategic, and it comes from what you could call the resilience factor. In an environment where the government might start to incentivize U.S.-made products or penalize imports, which is exactly what tariffs would do, the existing manufacturing bases of these large companies suddenly gain a lot of strategic value.
So their past investments basically act as a policy buffer, protecting them from future trade friction that's going to hurt their competitors.
That's it exactly. These established companies, the ones that already invested heavily in U.S. manufacturing, they're well positioned to protect their gross margins. They can avoid the operational disruption that might hit competitors who rely on imported goods. The market rewards that kind of stability.
So who best exemplifies this policy resilience? Let's talk about Pfizer, ticker PFE.
PFE is a prime example. They're a large-cap pharma company with deeply diversified operations globally, but they maintain a very robust U.S. footprint. You can think of their large, sterile injectables facility in Kalamazoo, Michigan, or their big R&D and manufacturing centers across the Northeast.
They have options.
They have the flexibility to pivot product sourcing to domestic lines very quickly if foreign imports become politically or economically unattractive. That existing infrastructure translates into guaranteed market access.
And Merck & Company, ticker MRK.
MRK is another major entity known for its highly resilient supply chain and its long-established manufacturing presence in the U.S., often focusing on high-complexity products like vaccines and biologics. When localization is incentivized, MRK's existing capacity, which was built up over decades, becomes immediately more competitive against foreign-sourced drugs.
So their commitment to U.S. production years ago is now paying strategic dividends.
That's a great way to put it.
We've established that this acquisition is a direct response to a potential cost increase tariffs on imports. So the first and most immediate group under pressure are those with cost structures that are heavily dependent on those imports. The import-exposed generic and specialty pharma manufacturers.
That is absolutely correct. For these companies, especially in generics, the cost structure vulnerability is severe. The generics market operates under fierce competition, so margins are already very tightly constrained, sometimes in the low single digits.
So any new cost is a major problem.
Any new cost is a major problem. If U.S. pharmaceutical tariffs rise, this group faces immediate and very pronounced pressure on their financial models.
Walk us through that financial risk. What happens to their profitability if, let's say, a 15% tariff is suddenly applied to the raw materials or finished products they import?
Well, the primary risk is margin compression, which can quickly turn a profitable product into a loss-making one. Higher import costs are a direct hit to their cost of goods sold. They'll be forced to absorb some of that cost or desperately try to renegotiate contracts with their foreign partners. For a generic company, a 15% cost hike can, and I mean this literally, erase the entire profit margin overnight.
And while the idea is that they could pass those costs on to consumers or payers, that process isn't instant, is it?
Not at all. There's often a considerable time lag in the pricing structure of pharmaceuticals, especially when you're dealing with long-term contracts with pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, or government pricing schemes.
So there's a painful gap.
There's a painful gap. Even if they can eventually pass the costs along, the lag time and the pricing friction involved can really hurt their near-term profitability and cash flow.
Let's identify the specific companies whose models expose them to this risk. First, Viatris, ticker VTRS.
VTRS has broad global operations, including substantial international manufacturing sites for their generic and specialty branded medicines. Their sheer scale and international footprint mean they are acutely exposed to changes in international trade policies that affect their cost of goods. Their whole model relies on minimizing input costs worldwide.
And the other large generic manufacturer, Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, ticker TEVA.
TEVA is in a very similar position. They're a multinational generic company whose import-heavy model is optimized for global supply chain efficiency. If the U.S. imposes tariffs on imported active pharmaceutical ingredients or finished dosage forms, TEVA faces immense pressure. Their dependence on low input costs is what makes their business work.
Okay, our second category facing pressure are the drug distributors caught in price volatility. Companies like McKesson and Cardinal Health are the essential logistics backbone, but their financial model is extremely sensitive to rapid price changes.
It is. Distributors operate on a volume-driven model with relatively thin margins, often just a few percentage points. Because of this, they are extremely sensitive to short-term disruptions or policy-driven price movements. They rely on predictable spreads between what they buy a drug for and what they sell it for.
So if a tariff is implemented, causing sudden price movements in the drugs they handle, how does that affect their day-to-day operation?
These sudden price movements, these policy-driven dislocations, can temporarily compress their distribution spreads. Think of McKesson, MCK. If they purchase $1 billion worth of imported product on a Monday, expecting a 2% spread but a 15% tariff is implemented on Tuesday,
Uh-oh.
the effective replacement cost of that inventory skyrockets. Their current inventory, bought at the lower cost, might be locked into pre-tariff contracts, or the market price might not move fast enough to cover the now higher future cost. Their spread is instantly jeopardized.
That is a pure logistics and inventory management nightmare, especially given the rapid flow of product.
It is. It increases their inventory management risk and the complexity of their rebate and contracting processes. They have to manage inventory they bought at one cost against a new reality of much higher replacement costs.
So let's name the key distributors. We mentioned McKesson Corporation, ticker MCK.
MCK is a major player in pharma distribution. Because of their scale and volume, they have massive amounts of inventory flowing through their system at any given time. This large volume, which is usually their advantage, makes them highly vulnerable to these sudden inventory risks.
And the second distributor, Cardinal Health, ticker CAH.
CAH is another large distributor operating under the exact same pressures. Their reliance on efficient inventory flow and tight control over spreads makes them very sensitive to policy changes that introduce sudden, unpredictable changes to drug prices. If the generic makers they source from, like Viatris, are struggling, CAH will inevitably absorb that volatility.
Our final pressure point is perhaps the most critical for the broader healthcare system. Payers exposed to rising drug costs, These are the insurance companies and health administrators.
Yes, this represents the end of the expense chain. If tariffs or increased localization costs contribute to a higher overall net drug cost, payers are the entities that ultimately absorb that expense, at least initially. They're the ones paying the claims.
So if manufacturers are forced to raise prices, how does that translate onto the payer's balance sheet?
It immediately puts upward pressure on their medical cost ratios, or MCRs. The MCR is the percentage of premium revenue that an insurer spends on patient care, including drug costs. When those drug costs rise unexpectedly, the MCR goes up, which directly squeezes the payer's profitability.
And their challenge is mitigation. They can't just flip a switch and raise premiums to cover that unexpected cost increase.
Exactly. Payers face challenges because they're bound by regulatory review cycles for premiums, which often lag by a year or more. They can't reprice their plans that quickly, so their alternative is to implement stricter controls over formularies, deciding which drugs to cover, and utilization controls to manage prescription volume.
And that can create its own set of problems.
It can. It can disrupt patient care and introduce operational headaches, but it's often their only recourse against a spiking MCR.
Which major payers are subject to this pressure? Starting with United Health Group, ticker UNH.
UNH is a huge diversified health company, including major insurance and medical services operations. Their sheer scale means that any systemic increase in pharmaceutical costs has a material and immediate effect on their MCR, translating into billions of dollars in added claims expense if not mitigated quickly.
And Cigna Group, ticker CII.
CI is another major payer that faces the continuous challenge of managing medical cost ratios in what could become a higher-cost pharmaceutical environment. Their strategy relies on predictable cost management. If the cost base for drugs becomes unpredictable and higher, CI has to rapidly adapt its pricing and formulary policies, placing them under considerable financial stress. So to summarize this analysis, we've established that Samsung Biologics' move to acquire GSK's Maryland facility is a concrete $280 million manifestation of a strategic risk mitigation effort against potential trade friction. This investment is accelerating U.S. localization efforts across biomanufacturing.
And we carefully examined the marketplace consequences. This commitment bolsters specialized suppliers that feed the biomanufacturing engine companies like Thermo Fisher Scientific, ticker TMO, and West Pharmaceutical Services, ticker WST. It also strategically secures large established domestic drug makers like Pfizer, ticker PFE.
At the same time, this policy environment creates clear points of pressure for import-reliant entities, notably generic drug manufacturers like Viatris, ticker VTRS, and major drug distributors like McKesson Corporation, ticker MCK, who are highly sensitive to price volatility and inventory risk.
So here is a final question for you to consider. The current drive toward establishing onshore capacity is purely driven by necessity. It's a hedge against policy risk. If companies successfully install vast amounts of new, specialized U.S. capacity over the next 5 years, how long until this necessity-driven localization creates such domestic infrastructure advantages that it permanently changes the economics, making U.S.-based drug development and manufacturing the preferred competitive global strategy, even if the tariffs that spurred the investment never actually materialize? Thank you for joining us for this analysis.
Mandatory disclaimer: this is not financial advice or buy or sell recommendations. This was purely the opinion of the author.